on tonight. Stephen Harrison's gonna come up and share some things about photo restoration, identification, and I'm sure he'll have some other things to share with us as well. Oh boy. And there he is, Stephen Harrison.
And the first question I have for everybody, right off the bat, how many of you still like to go to antique stores? Great show of hands for that, good. Somebody's saying, oh, what the heck does antique stores got to do with this? Well, my wife and I love going to antique stores, we do it quite often. And usually we'll get to about the first or second booth, and right off the bat, guess what? There's a box with about 50 to 200 photos right there. I tell my wife, honey, you just might as well go on, I'm gonna be a little busy. And I start going through these photos, but the way I'm going through them, I turn the box around and I'm looking at the back of the photos. And surprisingly enough, I'd be lucky to find one photo that's got anything written on the back. People, these are people's ancestors, grandkids, grandparents, great-grandparents. I mean, these photos are not identified. The only thing I can think of is they got picked up at an estate sale. And eventually they're gonna end up on the Cracker Barrel wall, if you're not careful. So your assignment for the next few years is to go through your old photos, because you may be the last person that knows who's in those photos. Back in 1985, I went to visit my mom, and she had all these old photos from my grandmother. And they, you know, these old photos, and you remember those little black four corners that you put the photos in? Bunch of those. And we'd go through them and I'd say, who's this, who's that, who's this, who's that? She could name everybody in that book. So later on, I got to taking those photos out, and there was nothing on the back. I said, Mom, I need you to do me a favor. I don't care how long it's going to take, but I need you to go through all these photos and identify all these photos. Whether you do it on the back or the front, I don't care. There'd be like a big group photo and a small photo, and she could write. She wrote in that old beautiful cursive handwriting that hardly anybody does anymore. And she would write everybody's names above their heads. And it took her about 3 years to get them all done. She passed away in 2006, and all those photos got passed over to me. The majority of the photos belong to my grandmother. Her name was Essie Millspaw, and her husband was Marvin White. And he had one of those old box cameras that you had to look down into. Took a ton of pictures with that thing. Even out in the ranch in New Mexico, there was no place to develop film. So guess what? He developed it right there in some old dugout that they lived in. And I ended up with all those photos, and they're all identified. However, every once in a while, this can happen. And I have a story. While I'm in the middle of putting this presentation together, this happens. There was a photo amongst all her stuff, and this is one of those old photos right here. It's on cardboard print. Now, this is John Freeman Millspaw and his three sons, Charles, Wilford, and Melvin. And Charles would be my great-grandfather over on the left, and John Freeman would be my great-great-grandfather. And I came up with a Descendants of John Freeman Millspaw Facebook page. And that was the profile photo for that picture, okay? I even used it at findagrave.com. He's buried over in Arapahoe, Oklahoma. And my wife and I visited that old cemetery back in 2015. And yeah, I'll put that photo. I'm not the one that's in charge of that site, I don't think, but I did put that photo. But you see how I identified it? Can you see their names in front of them? That's another way to do that through special photo programs like Adobe Photoshop. Elements is what I use. Okay, but a DNA cousin called me about 3 weeks ago, and we were going over some discrepancies in the tree, and he got to talking about Elizabeth Hall Cemetery, which is where my family's buried at in New Blaine, Arkansas. And he brought up the name McCutcheon. I said, okay. And he talked about there's a few McCutcheons there. So while I had him on the phone, I go to the Find a Grave page for Elizabeth Hall Cemetery, And I'm going through all these McCutcheon names, and guess what? Looky here. There's that same photo. Now, right under there is the person's name that put that photo up. So I jumped on there and clicked on that name and immediately sent an email. I said, hey, how come my great-great-grandfather is on your page? You know? And what did she come back at me? That is not your great-great-grandfather. You know? Well, upon doing some research, I had to send another email later and apologize. My grandmother, Essie Millspaw, had a sister named Ida Millspaw who married Grover McCutcheon. And Grover McCutcheon is related to Samuel McCutcheon. And that is where the photo came from. That photo got mixed in with all the grandma's photos that Mom got. But here's what happened. Let's go back to this. See, over on the right side, I took what she wrote and wrote everything down there, but I wasn't paying attention. If you look at what she wrote at the top, each name has a question mark.
Oh.
Well, that should have been a flag right away, but I was so excited to have this whole photo. It's like from 1895 or something. But I use this thing all over Ancestry, all over Finding Way. And I had it going everywhere, and then I had to make the announcement at the website, at the Facebook page, hey, dear cousins, guess what? This is John Freeman Millspaw. So I had to bust that bubble real quick. I mean, that was very disappointing, but the mystery is solved. Now, let's talk about restoring photos. But identify your photos and start on it this week if you haven't done it. A lot of you think, oh yeah, I've already got stuff written on it, you know, and you're gonna turn it over, you're gonna find out there's nothing there. So please, please, please take care of that. Now, this is a picture of my mom and her sister Leona. And this picture it's not too bad. So all I really needed to do here was just enhance it a little bit. So I open it up in Adobe Photoshop Elements, and I just enhance it a little bit. But I also, when you do digital photography, it's real easy to identify it this way. 2000, and I even put the year on it when it was taken, and I'm not even sure who took this picture. I may have done it, I just don't remember. But so I identify the photos like that, and I've done a ton of photos just like that. And that's a great way to do it digital. You don't have to worry about writing on the back. And another thing about writing on the back is a lot of the old photos, like the old cardboard ones, they're easy. But that Kodak paper, it doesn't like ink pens very well. You even have a hard time with a Sharpie back there. So sometimes I would get the address labels, little white address labels, and put those on the back. This is my great-grandpa Millspaw, and he's with his Creeder's peanut machine in the streets of Thomas, Oklahoma, which was where my mom was born. Now, that old Creeder's machine, I got another picture somewhere where there's a good shot of that machine, and he's standing on the streets of Weatherford, Oklahoma, which isn't far from there. And this was about 1935, I believe, something like that. Anyway, I had some former in-laws that lived in Chicago that worked at Creeder's that made those machines. And they specialize in popcorn. They're a big popcorn manufacturer now. So I took that one picture, I blew it up into an 8x10, and I sent it up there to them. And as far as I know, it is still hanging in the office somewhere in that building at Creeder's in Chicago. I thought that was just a nice gesture on my part, where they kept her. And here's Mom again. Now this picture was in 1928. That's the original one on the left. It's not too beat up. It's got, you know, I love the old sepia tone photos. That's always been my favorite. But then I did a quick edit on it there to the right and cleaned it up a little bit. There was a line going up on the right side. I tried to clean that up and get rid of it. And then I just converted it to a black and white and identified the photo and the year. Now, remember last month's presentation? This is for you, Kathy. There's Jack.
Oh.
When they did that presentation, I saw that and I said, hey, why don't you send that to me? Because I see that line going right down under his nose. And I got the name right?
Yes.
Jack Hall. And so I got to work on it, and I got a little carried away and just about erased his face. I didn't want to do that. I mean, there's a lot of different things. You can make one slip. It's almost like doing surgery and pull out the wrong tool or something. But anyway, that was my first edit. And then this is the main edit right here where I got it cleaned up a little bit better. Does that look okay?
Good.
So it's real simple to do something like that. And I was gonna try to demonstrate that tonight, but the program is on the other computer, which would not work here, so all we can just talk about it. Next photo. This is my great-grandma, Samuela Griggs White Ritchie and Beebe. She was married 3 times. The first person she was married to was John White, and they had 2 kids, Marvin and Alfred. Marvin's my grandfather. Alfred was Marvin's little brother. Well, John White up and took off and went to Oklahoma or somewhere, and they were just kids. Well, she ran on to hard times, and they were living up around Eureka Springs, Arkansas, and she put those kids in an orphanage, just temporarily, until she could get on her feet. Sadly enough, while they were in the orphanage, Marvin's little brother Alfred died. He wasn't but about maybe 3 years old or something like that. What he died of, I have no idea, but back in those days, I would hear that, my mom and dad would talk about kids having summer complaint or consumption or something like that, But later on, as the kids got a little bit older, she got the kids out, and I guess she hung around Northwest Arkansas for a while, but she ended up marrying a guy named Joe Ritchie, and he had a ranch in New Mexico. Matter of fact, it's Ritchie, New Mexico. If you look it up, it's considered a ghost town now. I never saw a town there. All I saw was dirt and cows, and you won't call that a town, I guess, but it wasn't very far from Fort Sumner. She worked at the Fort Sumner Hotel sometimes as a cook at the restaurant or whatever. And they asked Marvin, and my mom was probably about 5 years old when they moved out there, and then her little sister was born in 1922 in New Mexico. But about 1924, 25, somewhere in there, a big storm came up, and Joe Ritchie went out to close the gate and check on the stock, and he got hit by lightning. And the way my grandma put it, he got knocked right out of his boots. And they found his pipe about 20 feet away, broken in 2. So there that went. Well, Marvin and Esty and the kids moved back to Thomas, Oklahoma. Grandma Ritchie hung around to finish up all the business and whatever. And later on, then she marries a guy named George Beebe. George Beebe comes from money. All of a sudden, Grandma's wearing mink coats and stuff like that. And they ended up staying together and pretty much died within a year of each other, and they're buried up at New Plain. They ended up buying a farm in New Plain, Arkansas, 160-acre farm at $1 an acre. Well, they were getting too old to run that place, so they asked my grandfather, Marvin, if he'd like to come down and bring the family, and they just all live right there. Well, and I just found this out recently too. My mom, I asked her one time, why did you quit school at age 16? She said, well, we moved somewhere where there wasn't a school. And so I was asking my older brothers this, and they said, that's not why she quit school. They moved from, to put it plainly, they moved from indoor plumbing to outdoor plumbing when they moved to that farm. And the outhouse was about a quarter of a mile out in the middle of the pasture. And that's where they had to go. It wasn't just right off the house, it was way out there. I remember going there as a kid, I didn't like having to go out there. Thank God I was a boy. Anyway. Now this is in Thomas, Oklahoma. This is my mom. She's right on the front, and her friends Lois Rice and Vernon Clayton. And that's the original on the left. It looked like she took a pair of scissors to it and cut it out. It might have been in a frame at one time. So I started the edit. It was about 1930. And how many of you still have your baby book? That's not enough. So I know there's your baby book somewhere. Somebody's got it. This is something else that happened in the middle of putting this together. My oldest brother called me and said, you're not going to believe what I just found. I found your baby book. Wow. And it cleared up a big problem because it listed the great grandmother in there as Nancy Mims, and And there's been an argument about that name, whether it's Mims or Sims, and I've been fighting with other ancestors around the country over that. And right there it was, in 1956, they wrote Nancy Mims in that book. That's proof enough, isn't it? I would think so. Anyway, inside that book was an old beat up photograph of this guy. Y'all were supposed to do the,
look at you.
That's official. Well, this one was kind of beat up a little bit, and there's some discoloration, and this is about 1960, I was about 4 years old. And this is the first edit, and I tried to gray out that top background a little bit. It just wasn't working out right, so I kept right on going. And this one, I'm still working on it, and I keep going back and forth, and now I've got it messed up a little bit up there. My hat is starting to disappear on my hoodie. And then this is like the third edit on this one, and it's just having trouble getting it right. Then I finally came along and did that. And I thought that turned out pretty good. That smoothed out at the top, which was my main goal. But once I smoothed it out at the top, my hoodie disappeared, and it looks like my head's just coming right out of the sky. But it worked out all right. Now, the next photo I'm about to show you is a very challenging photo, and I really wish I could edit this one in front of you. But this is from about 1899. That's my grandmother Essie, and that is her, on the far left, that's her brother Howard, and the little one in the middle is her brother Marvin. Now I was looking at this thing's in bad shape. The corners and some of the background stuff, yeah, that's probably gonna be easy to take care of. What am I gonna do with Marvin's mouth? So I studied that and studied it. Well, got to looking at Howard's mouth, and I got to looking at Grandma's mouth, and I thought, well, they're related, why not take her mouth and put it on mine? Worked out pretty good, I think. Kids didn't smile back then anyway. They were using those old cameras where they had to take the lids off and just, now be still, don't move. I think the kid's gonna smile for 3 minutes? Not. So, anyway, I thought that turned out pretty good. Now, the next photo I'm about to show you is this. I thought I had the original in here, but anyway, this was my grandmother when she was probably about maybe close to 20 years old. But a nephew called me up and he said, "Man, you've got to check out this. This is a program, and I hope it works. I'll have to do it from here. But it's a Talking Heads program, and what it does, it brings the photos to life. But it's not known. Wait a minute, maybe it is. There it is.
Oh, yeah.
Have you guys seen this before? Anything like that? That freaked me out the first time I saw that. And boy, I started dragging out them old photos and scanning them and sending them to relatives. I said, guess what? I just brought your aunt to life. You know? I just thought that was the neatest thing. It's called Talking, T-O-K-K-I-N-G, Talking Heads. And that's my presentation right there on restoration and identification. Any questions? Wow, no questions. That means I did a good job. Thanks very much.
Let me ask you one more time, what is your program that you use?
Adobe Photoshop Elements.
Thank you.
Now, for years, I used regular Adobe Photoshop, which is it's like a monthly subscription. It was, or I was paying it by the year. It was like $120 a year, and then it kept going up, and it had all the fancy bells and whistles on it that you can do a lot of different things. The one thing I loved about that program is I love to do panel stitch photography, and I would take my camera and put it up like this, and what I could do is, like, I'll take a picture of this room, I take a picture here, let's say I'm taking a picture of you guys, okay? I'm taking a picture here, 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 and here, that's 4 photos, okay? And I get everybody patched together, and it looks like a nice wide angle shot. But the fun part is, I could take Kathy and put her in where she's sitting, and before I shoot the next shot, I move her back there, and the next shot, I move her over there, and she appears in the photo 4 different times. Now, I did that to a Christmas card. We had when we lived in Northwest Arkansas, her mom was living with us, and so I did a photo of us standing behind Mom, and then there was another photo of me and her standing in front of the fireplace, and then another photo, there was 3 of them, and we were just sitting there, and we were watching the other people. We're watching ourselves. And when I stitched it together, it looked like we were all in the same room. Now that I could do with that program. Elements, the one thing I like about Elements is it's a one-time charge. It's like $50. And it does everything you need it to do for your old photos. Anybody else?
It's not a question really, but something that I've done, is I have a, of course, computers fail, hard drives fail, and external hard drives fail. I have a cloud, a Dropbox file created, and I have it shared with all my siblings, and that's where I put my digital photos.
Oh, in the Dropbox?
Dropbox.
Yeah, I've done that.
And I share the photos with all, I have the photos shared with all the family. So we put photos in there, and we shared it with anybody who's allowed to look at it.
Yeah.
It says, we go and look at the photos and see what's what. I'm maybe obsessed about it. I have like 5 backups of everything, just in case.
Absolutely, I've had to do that too, because some photos,
Because we don't think it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen.
you know, I've had,
So, you know,
when I put together that Millspaw website, I also have another one called Descendants of Elam Harrison, 1802 to 1852. And the way I look at it, if you're in control of your ancestral photos, you would not believe what happens when you put together a Facebook page dedicated to that, so one of the main ancestors. Now, I could have went as far back as Nathaniel Millspaw, but I couldn't find any photos of him because I don't think they had very good cameras back in 1735 or whatever. But Elam Harrison was 1802. It started off as descendants of Richard Berry Harrison. Then all these other Harrison people started coming in and saying, hey, we're not related to him directly, but we're related to his sister or his brother or his other sister or whatever. So I had to change the name of the Facebook page to Elam Harrison. That way it incorporated more people. Now I'm starting to hear from, I started to hear from all these new cousins. I've met so many family members, let me put this another way. I've met so many family members that I have not met. It's all been on Facebook, or I've even talked to a few of them on the phone, and it's a great way to communicate. But it's also a great place to store those photos. You can store as many as you can on those Facebook pages. Find a Grave, I think they limit you to like 4 or 5 maybe. Ancestry, pop in on Ancestry. I mean, you can find a lot of photos on Ancestry, especially in the hint section. And you'll see photos that I've seen photos that people had of me. Let's go back to that John Freeman Millspaw photo real quick. There's something interesting about that. I feel like I had the original photo. That's a scan of my photo. That's a cardboard cutout. And I took a picture of it, holding it in my hand, and sent it to that girl. I said, look, I'm holding the original in my hand. This can't be this Sam McCutcheon guy. I was still wrong. Didn't matter. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody.